Some houses keep their age like a quiet whisper. Others keep their secrets like a clenched fist. When human remains are found beneath the foundation of a Victorian home scheduled for renovation, authorities assume they're relics of the 1800s, old bones from an old house. But for Bennett Crowe, a cold case investigator with a gift for reading what everyone else overlooks, the truth is rarely that simple. Forensics soon proves the victim died in 1996, decades after the house was built, buried beneath it while the family slept above. What began as a routine consultation becomes a journey into generational silence, digital footprints hidden in century-old journals, and a chilling pattern repeating across time. The House of Quiet Privilege, a story by 10 Chapters Studio. Chapter 1. The Bones Beneath. Snow drifted over the old Harwood house like a thin, reluctant veil. The Victorian sat alone on a wide corner lot, 3 gables, a wraparound porch, and peeling green paint that time had given up negotiating with. Renovation crews had already stripped away the porch railings, leaving the house with a raw, skeletal look, as though bracing for the next blow. Bennett Crowe stepped out of his car and crossed the frozen yard, breath forming small ghosts in the winter air. His gait had a subtle unevenness to it, the kind most people wouldn't notice, and Bennett preferred it that way. The site foreman met him halfway, rubbing his hands together through thick gloves. "You the cold case guy?" he asked. "Bennett Crowe. You the one who found the bones?" "Yeah. We were digging out the old crawl space to reinforce the foundation. Figured we'd hit a rock or pipe." The man shook his head. "Wasn't a pipe." "Show me." They walked to the opening beneath the house, where yellow tape fluttered weakly in the wind. A halogen lamp spilled harsh white light into the dirt cavity. 2 crime scene techs crouched inside, brushing around a half-exposed human femur. The air smelled of wet earth and old wood, a scent Bennett always associated with things buried too long. Detective Mara Duval looked up as he approached. "Crowe, good timing." "Mara," he nodded. They had worked together before. She was competent, impatient, and rarely rattled, so the tension around her eyes told him more than her words would. "What do we know?" he asked. "Bones are female," she said. "Prelim estimate, late teens to early 20s, found 16 inches below the original foundation line from 1891. At first we thought they were older, but they're not." "No." Mara handed him a sealed folder. Forensics rushed the analysis. She died between 95 and 98, blunt force trauma to the skull. Someone buried her under the house while the family lived above. Bennett flipped open the folder. Concise notes, efficient. One line stood out. "Found with fragments of fabric, synthetic blend, late 20th century." He closed the folder. "Who lived here around the time she died?" he asked. "The Harwoods. Old money family, town fixtures. The daughter, Eleanor, still owns the property. She's the one who hired the renovation crew." "Convenient timing," Bennett murmured. "Could be coincidence," Mara said. "She inherited the house last year." Bennett crouched beside the foundation cut, scanning the soil and the angle of the bones. The disturbed dirt suggested speed, secrecy, a burial done alone and in the dark. "Missing persons from that period?" he asked. Mara hesitated. "Crowe, you remember Marla Quinn?" "Babysitter," Bennett said. "Disappeared after a night shift. No evidence, no suspects. Case froze fast." "Right, she babysat here. Last person to see her was the Harwood patriarch. He died 2 years ago." Bennett looked back at the pale bone in the dirt. A teenager vanished in the late 90s, a young woman buried beneath the same house. 29 years of silence. Patterns didn't need to shout to be heard. "It's never coincidence," he said quietly. A tech in the pit called out, "Detective Duval? Found something else." Bennett and Mara stepped closer. The tech held up a small, mud-caked object sealed in a temporary evidence pouch. A heart-shaped locket, metal, tarnished, old-fashioned. Where was it? Right against the sternum. Bennett held out his hand and studied the locket through the plastic. The back was engraved with a single initial, H. He tilted the pouch under the light. Something glinted, a faint scratch inside the hinge, almost invisible. "Do you see that?" he asked. "What am I supposed to see?" Mara leaned in. "Numbers. Added later." He angled it again. A date appeared beneath the grime. 1996. Mara exhaled. "That gives us a window." "Bag it. Track it, photograph every angle. Prints if you can get them." He stepped back and looked up at the house, its blank windows, its heavy gables, the long shadow cast across the yard. Houses didn't hold secrets. People did. Some simply chose convenient places to bury them. "What's your read?" Mara asked. "That whoever did this picked the spot intentionally. Not panic, not carelessness, something personal." "Personal how?" He didn't answer. Not yet. "Get me the Harwood family journals, the digitized ones from the Historical Society." Mara blinked. "You think those dusty things matter?" "Most families hide their skeletons. This one just put theirs closer to the foundation." He turned away, giving the house one last long look. It seemed to watch him back, quiet and waiting. "History doesn't repeat itself. People do," he said, voice low. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. The Harwood Journals. The Harwood Historical Society building sat at the edge of town like an oversized storage shed someone had tried, unsuccessfully, to make charming. A wood stove crackled in the front room, fighting the draft slipping through old window frames. Bennett stepped inside, brushing cold air from his coat while taking in the rows of filing cabinets, microfilm drawers, and display cases. The woman behind the desk, silver hair in a tight bun, glasses on a chain, looked up with polite suspicion. "She must be Mr. Crowe," she said. "Detective Duval called. I'm Helen Carter." "I appreciate you opening up the archive," Bennett replied. Helen stood, smoothing her cardigan. "You're here about the journals." "That's right." "They're not diaries," she said firmly, as she led him toward a back room. "People hear journals and imagine confessions or emotional rambling. The Harwoods were meticulous record keepers. Household logs, property notes, staff issues, illnesses, repairs, visitors. Everything was documented." "Everything?" Bennett asked. Helen hesitated. "Everything they wanted people to see." That was the first useful sentence he'd heard today. She brought him into the archive room. Shelves of boxes, a scanning station, a computer humming softly. "Most researchers start chronologically, but I assume you'll want the files from the 90s, around the time Marla Quinn disappeared." Helen nodded and pulled up the directory. She opened Harwood Log 1995.
Neat handwriting filled the scanned pages. Groceries purchased, fence repairs, a birthday dinner, mundane. Bennett skimmed efficiently.
Harwood log, 1996. More of the same. Oiling hinges, canceling a gardener, a cousin visiting for Easter. But then, June 17. Evening schedule disrupted. Babysitter failed to return items to proper order. Father displeased. Bennett's eyes narrowed. "Do you know who wrote these?" he asked. "Eleanor's father," Helen said. "He kept the household records until his stroke in 1998. He opened Harwood log, 1997. April 3. Unsettling noise beneath floorboards overnight. Father checked the cellar first thing. Nothing found. A neutral sentence, but it left an itch beneath Bennett's ribs. Cellars again. He scrolled through the rest of the year. Nothing dramatic, nothing illegal, but the tone, cold, procedural, was exactly the kind of voice that could hide terrible things in plain sight. He switched back to the directory. There was a second folder, Harwood Reference Notes. "What are these?" Bennett asked. Helen moved closer. Supplemental notes. The Harwoods occasionally copied older entry fragments into newer logs. Family continuity. Continuity, a nice word for repeating patterns. Bennett opened a note from 1989, a copied fragment from a much older log. "Father insists she remain downstairs until her behavior improves. Says noise carries through the walls. She did not understand the instruction and was remanded." He tapped the screen. "This is a copy from the 1800s?" "Yes," Helen said softly. "Some entries were transferred across generations, family tradition. They believed history guided behavior." Bennett studied the phrasing. Father insists. Remain downstairs. Noise carries. Remanded. Not emotional, just documented. He opened another fragment, undated but marked in the metadata as originating from 1889. She asked to come upstairs. Father declined. Compliance expected. Not much. But paired with the 1996 line, Father displeased, babysitter out of order, it formed a shape. Not proof, but shape was how cold cases breathe back to life. Bennett clicked into the metadata view. That was where the truth usually lived. Scan date, 2018. Upload date, 2019. Modification date, May 2019. User, E. Harwood. Helen stiffened. "She volunteers here," she said quickly. "She helps maintain records." "And lately?" Helen faltered. "She checks the collection, touches up scanning errors, walks visitors through the history of the house." "And lately?" "She's been nervous." Helen lowered her voice. "She kept asking when the renovation at the house would start. And then when it did start, she came by the archive twice this week. To check what was in the logs. Or to make sure something had been removed." Bennett closed the folder. "Do you think," Helen said quietly, "this has happened before?" He didn't turn. "I think families repeat the stories they're most afraid of, and they do it without noticing." He headed for the door. There was one person he needed to talk to next. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. Eleanor Harwood. The Harwood property sat at the far end of Willow Street, set back behind a wrought iron fence that had once been impressive but now sagged like a tired spine. Bennett parked along the curb and took in the house from a distance. In daylight, it looked even older. Its paint blistered, its shutters crooked, its gables sharp against a pale sky. Someone was walking the perimeter. A lone figure moving with slow, deliberate steps, head slightly bowed, hair tied into a neat, dark knot. She traced the edge of the property line, as though following a boundary only she understood. Eleanor Harwood. She didn't seem surprised when Bennett approached, only paused, folding her gloved hands neatly in front of her. "You must be Mr. Crowe." Her voice was soft, almost practiced. "Detective Duval said you might stop by." "Thank you for your time. I'm consulting on the remains found under the house." Her eyelids flickered with something. Shock, fear, calculation, too quick to categorize. When she answered, her tone was steady. "Yes, a terrible discovery. I can't imagine how that could have happened." She swallowed, throat tight. "Have you identified the victim?" "Not yet. We're matching missing persons from the mid-90s. There. A brief tension in her shoulders. "You grew up here," Bennett continued. "You would have been, what, late teens in 96? 17, she said quietly. "I was still in school." Bennett gestured toward the house. "You hired the renovation crew?" "Yes. The foundation has been unstable for years. Father always delayed repairs." A practiced answer, smooth, but without warmth. The kind of sentence said many times before. "Strange place to bury someone," Bennett said casually. "Under a house full of people."
Eleanor's breath fogged in front of her, a thin cloud that dissolved quickly. She said, "People do strange things when they're frightened, or cruel. Did your father ever mention problems here? Strange noises, issues with the cellar?" Her chin lifted half an inch, a tiny motion, but loaded. She said slowly, "He mentioned rodents. Old houses attract them." "Nothing else?" Bennett asked. "No." Her eyes didn't move. They held his steadily, unblinking, like someone balancing on the edge of a story they weren't prepared to tell. Bennett shifted his attention to the side yard. The ground was still disturbed from earlier excavation. Beyond that, a narrow path wound toward a half-collapsed garden shed. "You check the property a lot," Bennett said. "Helen Carter mentioned you walk the perimeter whenever construction starts." Eleanor's gaze flickered. There it was again, that flash of something. She said, "I don't like people damaging things. The house is old. It deserves respect." "Most people don't respect crawl spaces," Bennett replied lightly. Her lips tightened. "Old houses have history. Families have traditions." He watched her. She seemed composed, but too composed, every movement measured, every sentence trimmed to the safest possible length. Bennett asked, "What about traditions like record-keeping? Helen Carter said your family kept household logs for generations." "Yes," Eleanor said, hands tightening in her gloves. "Father insisted on it.
He believed documentation created order. Did you ever write in them? She shook her head. No, Father wrote everything. I read them sometimes as a girl, but she paused. They weren't meant for children. What do you mean? They were meticulous. She looked away. Father liked things exact, precise, controlled. Bennett let a moment pass, long enough for silence to stretch between them. The wind picked up, rattling the bare branches along the fence line. "Miss Harwood," he said finally, "when you walked the property this morning, before the police arrived, what were you looking for?" Her eyes snapped back to his. I came to see the progress, that's all. Before the crew arrived, before anyone was here." A faint flush crept up her neck. "This is my home. I'm allowed to walk the grounds." Of course. Bennett let the words sit. People often unraveled in silence faster than an interrogation. But not Eleanor Harwood. Instead, she straightened her back, gathered herself, and said, quote, "I want the renovation to continue. I don't want the house condemned. It's important." Why? A lot of people would walk away after finding remains on their property. "Because this is my family's legacy," she said sharply. Then softer, "The house isn't responsible for what people do."
That part, Bennett believed. "Have you heard of Marla Quinn?" Bennett asked. A small tremor went through her hands. "Yes," she whispered. "I remember her. She babysat here. She was nice." "What happened the night she disappeared?" "I don't know." Her voice cracked. "Father sent her home after I went to bed. That's what he told me." "What did he say the next morning?" Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself. "He said she never made it home." "And you believed him?" Her eyes filled, not with tears, but with something colder, something starved. "I had to," she said. Bennett stepped back, giving her space. "I'll be in touch." She nodded, but didn't move. She stood in the yard long after he left, a lone figure dwarfed by the massive old house behind her. Bennett watched her through the rearview mirror as he drove away. People didn't cling to houses like that unless they were afraid of what might surface, or unless they knew exactly what was buried beneath them. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. Underneath the Floorboards. Detective Mara Duval was waiting for Bennett at the station. A stack of folders under one arm, and the kind of expression that suggested caffeine hadn't fixed her morning. She said, "You spoke to Eleanor," as he walked in. "I did," Bennett replied. "She's holding something back." "That's her default setting," Mara said. "This family has been holding things back since the Civil War." Bennett sat. "What do we have?" Mara opened the top file. "I pulled everything on the Harwoods, the house, and anyone tied to the property during the mid-90s. Found a few things that don't fit the narrative Eleanor gave us." She flipped a page. First, Marla Quinn's last known movements. Multiple witnesses saw her leave the Harwood house around 10 p.m. That aligns with the father's statement. Sure. But here's the thing. 2 neighbors reported hearing raised voices inside the house around 9:30. Never followed up. The original detective wrote it off as household noise. Convenient. Second, Mara continued, Marla had complained to a friend about the Harwood patriarch a few weeks before she disappeared. What kind of complaint? Nothing concrete. just that he was particular and liked things in order. Ring any bells? Bennett's thoughts went straight to the logs, to the phrasing, to the cold consistency.
Yes, Bennett said. Mara handed him the next file. And then there's Eleanor. He slid it open. Her school records, her perfect attendance until 3 months before Marla's disappearance. 3 unexplained absences, 2 late arrivals, 1 counselor note, student withdrawn, avoids eye contact, reports trouble sleeping. Eleanor was in the house the night Marla vanished, 17 years old. If anything happened, she saw it or heard it, or hid from it, Bennett said. Mara caused. You think she's protecting the father? I think she's been protecting him her entire life. Mara exhaled. There's more. You should see this. She slid over a photo, a grainy scan from a 1997 insurance inspection. The Harwood cellar, lit by a single exposed bulb, the dirt floor, a narrow wall reinforcement. Nothing unusual except the caption at the bottom. Cellar access padlocked per owner request. Locked from the outside, and the inspector noted he was not permitted to assess interior section. Which interior section? Bennett asked. Mara pointed to the darker area behind a support post. This one. A part of the cellar no one was allowed to examine. A place someone didn't want documented. What about the renovation crew? Bennett asked. Did they start digging there yet? No, that section hasn't been touched. Mara's eyes sharpened. Why? You think our victim is Marla? No. This victim had a locket dated 96. That's too tidy. If Marla was buried here, I doubt the father would have left anything that personal. So, this could be someone else. Yes. Someone connected to the house. Someone he could manipulate or silence. Mara closed the file. We need a warrant for a full search of the cellar. And we need to do it before Eleanor tries to interfere. She's been walking the property every day, making sure nothing gets uncovered she didn't approve. Mara nodded. I'll push it through. I want to see the house again. Now. Yes. Mara grabbed her coat. Let's go.
The Harwood house loomed even larger in daylight, the sagging porch and bare trees giving it a hollow, waiting look. A forensic van was parked along the curb. Mara flashed her badge at the uniformed standing guard, and they stepped inside. The moment they crossed the threshold, the temperature dipped. Old houses stored cold the way they stored secrets. Bennett scanned the hallway, wallpaper peeling, floors warped from decades of moisture, a faint smell of cedar and mildew. You notice something? Mara asked. Sound, Bennett murmured. He stepped again. The floorboards creaked, but not in a predictable pattern. Not on the joists where they should have. He knelt and pressed 2 fingers to the hardwood. There's space underneath. It's a crawl-space house. Not this much space. He tapped near the edges. Hollow. Then the center. Hollow, but deeper. He moved toward the dining room. A section near the far wall made a muted, unusual thud. What's that? Mara asked. A subfloor partition. Different density. Could be repairs, or something added later. Added for what? Isolation, Bennett said. They followed the sound toward the back hall. Bennett stopped at a narrow bore tucked behind the staircase. The cellar, Mara said. He opened it. A wooden staircase descended into cold darkness. A single bulb hung overhead, dust swirling in its weak glow. They stepped down. The cellar floor was uneven, patches of dirt mixed with old concrete.
Reinforcement beams ran across the ceiling. On the far side, exactly as in the photograph, a section of the cellar wall looked wrong. Not original stone. Newer, smoother, poured concrete, not field stone. A repair? Mara asked.
A seal, Bennett corrected. Something was closed off. He stepped closer. The surface held faint marks, scrapes from a tool, filled-in edges, uneven texture. Someone had done this themselves, not a contractor. Mara angled her flashlight. Crowe, look. A corner of the wall, where the concrete met the floor, had a small crack, just wide enough for something to slip through. Inside the crack, barely visible, was fabric. Light blue, stained dark. Bennett didn't breathe. "Bag and tag," he said quietly. Mara nodded, calling a tech. Bennett stepped back, eyes fixed on the sealed wall. Someone had walled off part of the cellar. Someone who needed a space no one would check. Someone exact. Someone who liked things in order. Whomever they had found under the foundation, there was more here. Much more. End of Chapter 4.
Chapter 5. What the Wall Hid. The fragment of fabric was sealed in an evidence pouch and carried upstairs, but its presence lingered in the cellar like a final breath that refused to leave. Bennett stood in front of the sealed wall as the techs worked behind him. The concrete partition felt wrong, not just because it was newer, but because it didn't belong in the logic of the room. Someone had deliberately altered the shape of the cellar. Someone with reason. Someone with time. Mara returned, tucking the evidence into her jacket. "Crowe, you need to see this." He followed her toward the stairs. When the tech pulled the fabric out of the crack, there were fibers stuck behind it. What kind? Carpet fibers, and something else. Adhesive. Industrial grade. A soundproofing adhesive? Bennett asked. Mara paused mid-step. "You think the section was soundproofed?" "It fits." Bennett reached the top of the stairs. Concrete, soundproofing, an enclosed space. Someone wanted whatever happened down there to stay down there. And Eleanor had access, Mara added. They stepped into the dining room again, the air warmer but no more forgiving. Techs moved around them, photographing baseboards and measuring floor shifts. "Did you speak to the contractor?" "Yeah. He said that section of the house always gave them trouble. He assumed the wall was from a previous owner." "Which previous owner?" Bennett said. "There haven't been many." He headed toward the living room, drawn by a detail he hadn't registered earlier. A large framed photograph hung above the fireplace. The Harwood family, taken sometime in the early 2000s. The father stood stiffly in the center, one hand on Eleanor's shoulder. She was smiling, barely. There was something resigned in it. Bennett looked closer. The father's other hand was holding keys. "Do we know if the cellar had multiple locks?" he asked. Mara glanced at the photo. "According to the insurance report, yes. A padlock on the outside, plus a bolt on the inside of the stair door. A double lock system." "Controlling who entered and who left," Bennett murmured. He turned away from the photograph. "It would matter later."
They stepped outside, where the forensic van hummed as samples were processed. Eleanor Harwood was sitting on the porch steps, arms wrapped around herself despite her coat. She looked up when they approached. "Detective Duval," she said, "you're still here. We're conducting a deeper search of the property. Standard procedure." Eleanor nodded, but her eyes darted to Bennett, searching for something. Reassurance? Confirmation?
Permission. He gave her none. Miss Harwood, did your father ever do repairs to the cellar? Repairs? Her voice tightened. No, we didn't use the cellar much. Records say otherwise. Foundation adjustments, wall reinforcements, noise complaints. Eleanor blinked, slowly, like someone processing too many words at once. My father handled everything down there. He didn't like when people went into the lower rooms. He said it was unsafe. Unsafe how? The beams were old. The walls crumbled. She swallowed. At least that's what he told me. And you believed him? Bennett asked. She hesitated for just 1 second, but it was enough. I was a child. What else was I supposed to do?
A shout from the yard interrupted them. "Detective! Crowe! You need to see this!" They walked toward the excavation site behind the house. 2 techs were kneeling beside a disturbed patch of earth, brushing away loose dirt. "What did you find?" Mara asked. The tech pointed. At first, it looked like debris, something metallic, half buried in the soil. But as they cleared more dirt away, the shape emerged clearly. A lock, old, thick, heavy, the kind used for storage units or sealed rooms. "Where was it?" Bennett asked. "Buried a few inches down. Looks like it was dumped when the renovations started. It's been here a while." Bennett examined the surface. The metal was weathered, but the scratches were distinct, deep grooves where the lock had been forcibly removed. "Someone ripped this off a door," Bennett said. "Not opened it, tore it." Mara exhaled. "And then hid it?" "Or tried to," Bennett said. Eleanor stepped closer, hugging herself. That isn't from this house. I've never seen it." She was trembling. Whether from cold or memory, Bennett couldn't tell. "Miss Harwood," Bennett said quietly, "when you were a teenager, did you ever hear anything from the cellar that didn't make sense?" Her breath caught. Just once, barely audible. He waited. Finally she whispered, "At night, sometimes I heard the floorboards creak, like someone was walking underneath the house. But Father said it was just the pipes." "Pipes don't walk," Bennett said gently. A tear slid down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly. "I don't know anything. I swear I don't." But her voice shook with the strain of holding too much inside for too long. A forensic tech approached. "Crowe, we have something else." Another evidence pouch. Inside, a small rusted hinge. "Found next to the lock," the tech said. "Possibly the same piece." Bennett turned it over. There were faint flecks of something on the edge. Blue-gray. Hard to see in the dim light. "Paint," Bennett said. Mara frowned. "From what?" "From the inside of a door," Bennett replied. "A door someone didn't want opened anymore." He straightened slowly, looking at the house again, the sagging rafters, the dark windows, the uneasy quiet. "What are you thinking?" Mara asked. "That the body we found under the foundation isn't the first," Bennett said, "and it might not be the last." Mara's face tightened. "You think there's more?" "I think," Bennett said, "we're only seeing the surface." The wind picked up, rattling the porch boards. Somewhere inside the house, something creaked, soft, slow, as though responding. And Bennett Crowe knew with certainty. Whatever the Harwood family buried here, the house wasn't done revealing it. End of Chapter 5.
Chapter 6. The Sealed Room. They got the warrant by late afternoon. By then, the sky had settled into a flat, colorless gray, the kind that made the Harwood house look even more like a photograph left too long in the sun. Bennett and Mara stood at the top of the cellar stairs while a structural engineer and a crime scene supervisor went over the plan. "We'll cut into the upper portion of the wall first," the engineer said, tapping the concrete with his knuckles. "Slow, controlled. We don't know what's behind it, and I don't want the ceiling coming down on anyone." "Fair," Mara said. "I'd like to avoid paperwork that involves the phrase, 'crushed by historical crime scene.'" Bennett said nothing. His eyes stayed on the sealed section of wall, tracing the faint variations in color, the uneven lines where hand-troweled concrete met older stone. The first cut of the saw echoed through the cellar, a harsh mechanical whine that set dust drifting from the beams. Bennett stepped back out from the immediate work zone, but not far. He wanted to see the exact moment the wall blinked. Concrete dust coated the air, mixing with the earth smell until the cellar tasted like wet chalk. The engineer worked deliberately, cutting out a rectangle near the top half of the partition. When the saw fell silent, the sudden quiet rang louder. "Ready?" the engineer said. Mara nodded. "Do it." They pried the cut piece loose. It resisted, then tilted outward with a reluctant scrape. A gust of colder air slid through the gap, air that had been trapped for a long time. The beam of a flashlight cut into the darkness beyond. "Small space," the engineer said. "Maybe 8 by 10? Ceiling's low." "Any structural issues?" Mara asked. "Not unless someone starts kicking at the supports. Stay along the edges and you'll be fine." Mara glanced at Bennett. "You want first look?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes."
They widened the opening enough for a person to pass through. Bennett ducked, stepping into the sealed room. The air was stale, heavy with the faint sourness of old sweat and something metallic that time couldn't quite erase. His flashlight swept over the interior. The floor was covered by the remnants of carpet, once beige, now stained and matted. Industrial padding showed through in torn patches. The walls had been coated in something dark that had peeled in places, revealing plywood beneath. Soundproofing, Bennett thought. Or its attempt. On the far wall, a ring of 5 metal anchors sat bolted into the wood, empty now. Below them, faint scuff marks marred the carpet, as though something heavy had been dragged repeatedly. "See anything?" Mara's voice filtered in. "Not bones, but not nothing." He moved further in. Near the corner, a narrow mattress lay directly on the floor, its fabric gray with age. The imprint of a body still lingered in its shape. Beside it sat a metal bucket and a cracked plastic basin. "Crowe?" Mara called. "Talk to me. It's a room. Not for storage, for keeping someone here." There was a long exhale from the doorway. He turned his flashlight towards the ceiling. Scratches marked the beam above the mattress, long and desperate, as if someone had reached up and clawed at the wood. In the opposite corner, a small pile of objects had gathered where they'd been forgotten. A hairbrush with broken teeth, a comb, the brittle remains of a paperback book whose pages had fused together. Bennett crouched by the book, angling the light. The cover was half destroyed, but a few letters remained. MARLAQUINN. He stared. "Crowe?" Mara again. He picked up the book with gloved hands and carried it to the opening. "Look at the author's name." Mara squinted. "Quinn." He nodded. "Marla wrote poetry, according to her file."
Self-published a small collection with a vanity press in '95.
Mara's face hardened. So she was here. At some point, Bennett said. Could be her book was brought in later. But either way, this room wasn't theoretical. It was used. He handed the book to the tech outside, then stepped back into the chamber for another sweep. Near the mattress, something small glinted under the edge of the carpet. Bennett knelt, peeled it back carefully, and uncovered a thin metal chain. One end was broken. A necklace, no pendant. Locket chain, he said quietly. Same thickness as the one we found under the foundation. Mara swore under her breath. So the victim under the house was in here before she was moved. Likely, Bennett said. Held here, controlled, then buried when she became inconvenient. And Marla? He looked back at the scratched beam, the mattress, the book. Marla might not be the body under the foundation, but she's connected. A tech at the opening cleared his throat. Mr. Crowe, there's something on the wall you should see. He turned. Along the plywood, near eye level, faint writing had been etched with something sharp and desperate. Time and moisture had blurred the letters, but with the flashlight angled just right, they emerged. 3 lines. I was here. He doesn't stop. If this is found, it wasn't an accident. No name, no date, just those words. He stared at them for a long time. Mara's voice softened. You think that's Marla? Maybe, Bennett said. Or one of the others. Others? Bennett stepped back into the main cellar, the sealed room at his back. You don't build a room like that for a one-time event. You build it for a pattern. Mara closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with a new hardness. We'll run trace on everything in there. DNA, fibers, prints, tool marks, all of it. Good, Bennett said, because we need to know how many stories that room belongs to, and who exactly helped keep the door shut. He glanced up the stairs, toward the dim outline of the house above. End of Chapter 6.
Chapter 7. Patterns in the Dark. By the time they cleared the sealed room, evening had crept across the Harwood property. The house looked different in the fading light, darker, heavier, as if the past had begun to seep through its walls. Bennett stood on the porch while Mara coordinated the evidence transfer. A forensic tech walked past him, carrying a sealed container with the mattress inside. Another followed with the carpet, folded over itself like something indecent. Eleanor Harwood watched from the top step, pale and rigid. She found something, she said, not a question, an acknowledgement she couldn't avoid. We found a room behind the cellar wall, Bennett replied. Her throat tightened. A room. Small, soundproofed. Someone lived there. Her face drained. Lived? Involuntarily, Bennett watched her carefully. It wasn't storage. She sat down abruptly, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles blanched. I don't understand, she whispered. I lived here. I never saw any room. Your father went down there alone. He controlled access. He told you the cellar was unsafe. I believed him, her voice cracked. I was afraid of it. Afraid of what? Bennett asked. Eleanor swallowed. Of him being angry. There it was, the truth slipping through the seams. Mara approached. We need you to come to the station for a formal statement. Eleanor looked up sharply. Am I under arrest? No, Mara said gently, you're not. But we need everything you remember. Eleanor nodded weakly, but Bennett saw something in her expression. Something conflicting. Fear, yes, but also calculation. She was deciding what parts of the truth she could survive.
The interview room was warm, almost stifling, which suited Bennett. Comfort loosened tongues. Mara set up the recorder, then opened a clean file. Eleanor, we're going to start with an easy question. Did anyone else besides your father use the cellar? Eleanor shook her head. No. Did he restrict access? Yes. Did you ever hear anything coming from the cellar? Eleanor hesitated, eyes lowered. Mara waited. Silence is an interrogation tool Bennett used frequently. Mara was learning. Finally, Eleanor exhaled. Sometimes, not often, but sometimes I heard thumping. Once or twice, maybe a voice, but faint. Male or female? Mara asked. Female. Eleanor's hands trembled. I told Father once. He said old pipes make strange noises, that the house settles, that I shouldn't imagine things. He made me feel ridiculous. Bennett whittened that sentence down without looking up. Did you ever go down there anyway? No. Why not? Because I didn't want him to be angry. Father's anger was a large thing in a small house. And your mother? Bennett asked. She died when I was 12. How? Mara asked. A fall, Eleanor whispered. Down the back stairs. Father said she was carrying laundry and slipped. Did that explanation make sense to you? No, Eleanor said softly. But he said it often enough that eventually I didn't question it. Mara leaned back, eyes flicking briefly toward Bennett. This wasn't just a bad man. This was a system, a family held together by fear and control. Last question for now, Bennett said. Did your father ever mention Marla Quinn after she disappeared? Eleanor's face changed, subtly but unmistakably. Yes, she whispered. Once. And? He said she'd run off, that good girls sometimes turn out to be disappointments. The temperature in the room felt like it dropped 10 degrees. And you believed him? Then it said. No, Eleanor said quietly. But I pretended to. Mara nodded, ending the session. We'll pause here. When she stepped out to file paperwork, Bennett stayed behind. Eleanor looked at him with a strange, searching intensity. You think my father was a monster? She said. I think your father made decisions he didn't want questioned, Bennett replied. Then why can't I remember anything specific? Her voice rose, desperate. If something terrible happened here, why didn't I see it? You saw exactly enough, just not all at once. He let that sink in before adding, memory protects us until it doesn't. Eleanor looked down, eyes glistening. When Mara returned, she motioned Bennett into the hall. We got something back from the first lab rush. You're going to want to see it. What is it? The chain from the sealed room, tested for biologicals. We got a partial DNA trace. Bennett waited. It isn't Marla Quinn, Mara said. We ran it against her mother's reference sample. Then who? Mara handed him a printout. Match found in the missing persons database. Report from 1994, 2 years before Marla disappeared. She tapped the name. Lydia Mercer, age 22. Last seen doing day work at the Harwood property. Bennett stared at the page. There's more, Mara said, lowering her voice. Witness reports from 1994 indicate Lydia told a coworker she didn't like being near the cellar when she worked at the house. And she vanished shortly after,
Bennett said. Yes. He folded the paper slowly. Crowe, Mara said, lowering her voice. We might be dealing with multiple victims. He nodded once. And the Harwoods might have known more than one secret. Bennett stepped back into the interview room, watching Eleanor through the glass. She sat alone, hands folded, eyes empty, shoulders heavy with a history she inherited without asking. He didn't know yet whether she was witness, accomplice, or collateral. But he knew one thing. Whatever happened in that cellar, it didn't start with Marla Quinn, and it didn't end with Lydia Mercer. End of Chapter 7.
Chapter 8. The Ledger of Silence.
The next morning, the station conference room was covered in files. Missing persons reports, contractor invoices, repair logs, and decades-old permits. Mara stood at the head of the table with a cup of coffee strong enough to dissolve metal. "We need to map this," she said, "chronologically and geographically." Bennett nodded. Patterns first, motive later. A third detective, Roland Briggs, entered with a stack of photocopies. "Pulled everything on the Harwood property going back to the 80s, he said. "You two are going to love this." Bennett had rarely loved anything Roland brought him, but he accepted the folder. Inside were invoices. Dozens. All for the same type of work: foundation reinforcement, structural stabilization, lower-level ceiling. "Why so many repairs?" Mara asked. "They weren't repairs," Bennett said. "They were maintenance." "Maintenance of what?" Roland asked. Bennett looked up from the pages. "A system." Roland shrugged. "If there was a system, someone else must have known. Nobody builds a reinforced room alone." "Unless they paid in cash," Mara said. Roland tapped the invoices. "Funny you say that. None of these were paid through bank transfers. Every single one says cash received." Mara stiffened. "From who?" Roland said, "Signed by Harwood Sr., but look at the amounts." He dropped another sheet on the table. It was a summary. 1993, $400. 1994, $500. 1996, $450. 1998, $600. "Small jobs," Bennett said. "Too small," Roland replied. "These aren't foundation projects. They're favors. Under-the-table favors." "And favors mean secrecy," Mara said. Bennett closed the file slowly. "Let's talk to the contractor," he said. Harrison Griggs was retired and living in a modest bungalow 2 towns over. He answered the door in a flannel shirt and jeans, his gaze wary until Mara flashed her badge. "We're following up on some old work at the Harwood house," she said. Griggs's reaction was immediate. His jaw tightened. "That place again?" he muttered. "I told you all I know." "We're not asking you to repeat your statement," Bennett said calmly. "We're asking what you didn't say." Griggs hesitated, then stepped aside. "Fine, come in." They sat in his small kitchen, a pot of coffee brewed behind him, the scent sharp and bitter. "You worked for Harwood Sr., Mara said. "Too many times," Griggs muttered. "Always small stuff, odd hours, no paper trail." "What kind of work?" Bennett asked. "Quiet work," Griggs said. "He'd call and ask me to patch something, seal something, reinforce something. Always in the lower level.
always when his wife was away or late at night. You never reported it? Mara asked. To who? Griggs snorted. Man was respected, had friends in all the right places. Bennett leaned forward. Did you ever ask why he needed so many repairs? Griggs's eyes dropped to the table. He said the house had weak points, that it wasn't built right. But it was built fine. I think... He swallowed. I think he needed the walls stronger for reasons he wasn't about to share. Did you ever see anyone else down there? Mara asked softly. Griggs hesitated. Once. The way people hesitate when conscience finally catches up with memory. There was a girl, he whispered. Not Eleanor, someone else. Could have been a young woman. I saw her through the stairwell when he thought I'd gone upstairs already. Bennett's pulse sharpened. Doing what? Sitting, Griggs said. On the floor, knees pulled up, like she didn't know whether to stand or hide. Harwood came out of the room and told me never to go down there again unless he was with me. Which year was this? Bennett asked. Griggs clenched his hands. 94, maybe 95. Lydia Mercer. Bennett kept his voice steady. Did you tell anyone? No, Griggs said, shame tightening his voice. And I regret that every day. Bennett nodded once. Not absolving, not condemning. What about Eleanor? Mara asked. Did she ever speak to you? Griggs hesitated. This one was worse. She left me a note once, slipped it under my truck tire. What did it say? Mara asked. I don't have it anymore. His voice cracked slightly. But I remember the words. He looked at Bennett. It said, "Don't fix the wall again. She's still in there." Silence filled the room, thick, breathless. And I ignored it, Griggs whispered. I thought she was confused or making up stories. Kids do that. I told myself that. Do you believe that now? Bennett asked. Griggs shook his head. No. I think she knew exactly what was happening, and I think she was terrified.
Back in the car, Mara stared ahead, hands gripping the wheel. She tried to warn someone, she said, at 17. And no one listened, Bennett added. Because of her father. Because of who he was, Bennett said, and because people only see what they're willing to believe. Mara exhaled slowly. So now what? Now, we find out why Lydia and Marla weren't the only ones. Mara glanced at him. You think there are more? Patterns don't stop at 2, Bennett said. Patterns grow. His phone buzzed. He checked the screen. A forensic update. From the sealed room. He opened it. Mara watched his expression tighten. What is it? Bennett lowered the phone slowly. There were fingerprints on the plywood inside the sealed room. One clear enough to match. And it belongs to someone who shouldn't be there. Who? Mara pressed. Bennett looked out the windshield at the Harwood house in the distance, its upper windows dark as shuttered eyes. Eleanor, he said. Mara froze. That doesn't make sense. It makes perfect sense, Bennett said quietly. We just don't know which part of her story it explains.
End of Chapter 8.
Chapter 9. What Eleanor Knew.
The lab results came in just before noon.
Mara caught Bennett as he walked into the station, a manila envelope in her hand, and a look that said the contents wouldn't make anything easier. She said, "They rushed the comparison. You want the short version or the full report?" Bennett replied, "Start with the name." She opened the folder. She said, "The remains under the foundation are a match for Marla Quinn. Mitochondrial DNA confirms it. The body is hers." Bennett absorbed that without flinching. "And Lydia Mercer?" he asked. Mara said, "The chain from the sealed room still points to Lydia. Her DNA's there. She was held in that room, but the body under the house is Marla's." "Which means," Bennett said quietly, "we have at least 2 victims in the same structure." Mara nodded. "2 that we can prove." He glanced at the report again. One line stood out. "Microscopic particulates on clothing. Traces of concrete dust. Matching mix from cellar partition." Bennett said, "Marla was in that room, then moved. Lydia before her. The room wasn't a one-time improvisation. It was a method." Mara exhaled. "And now we have Eleanor's fingerprints inside it." "Which brings us to our next step," Bennett said. "We stop treating her as a frightened bystander." They brought Eleanor back in that afternoon. This time, they didn't use the standard interview room. Bennett chose a smaller one, no windows, softer light, a table without scratches, neutral ground, nothing to anchor her to old narratives. She sat across from him, hands folded tightly, eyes ringed with fatigue. "She said you wanted to help," Bennett began. His voice was even. "This is how you do it." Eleanor swallowed. "I've told you everything I remember." "No," Bennett said. "You've told us everything you could live with." Her gaze flicked up, startled. Mara slid a photo across the table. It showed the plywood from the sealed room, a faint fingerprint highlighted in blue. "This is yours," Mara said, "confirmed by the lab. Left hand index, partial but clear enough." Eleanor's fingers twitched, then stilled. "You touched the walls in that room," Bennett said. "You weren't just hearing noises above it. You were inside it." She started, then stopped. Her throat worked. "No, I don't remember."
"Try," Bennett said. No edge, no sympathy. Just instruction. Silence stretched. A clock ticked somewhere down the hall. Eleanor's breathing grew shallow. Finally she whispered, "He told me not to go down there." "Your father," Bennett said. "Yes. And you listened," Bennett said. "Until the night you didn't." Her eyes closed, a single tear slid down, leaving a thin track. "I was 16, she said, maybe 17. I heard something. Not pipes, not the house, something else." "Describe it." "A voice," she whispered. "Someone crying. It wouldn't stop. I put my hands over my ears, but it was still there. So I opened the cellar door." She stared past them, seeing something long buried. "I went down when Father was out. He'd gone to a meeting. At least that's what he told me. The house was quiet, too quiet." "And the door to the room?" Bennett asked. "Locked. Always locked." Her hands tightened. "I'd watched him before. The way he turned the key, where he put it afterwards." "You stole the key," Bennett said. "I borrowed it," she insisted weakly. Then shook her head, correcting herself. "I stole it. I took it while he was gone." Her shoulders shook once, then stilled. "I opened the door, and there she was." "Lydia?" Mara asked. "I didn't know her name then."
Just a girl, maybe a little older than me. She was sitting on the mattress. Her wrists were red. She looked at me like I was some kind of miracle and said, "You're real." The room went very quiet. "What did you do?" Bennett asked. "I brought her water. I brought food from the kitchen. I told her I would help her, but I couldn't get her out of the house alone. I didn't drive. I didn't know how to make it right." "So what did you do instead?" "I tried to make it less terrible," she said. "I kept coming back when I could. I told her my father would let her go if she behaved. That's what he told me, that she had done something wrong, that she was being corrected." Bennett wrote nothing now. He just watched. "Then one day," Eleanor continued, "she was gone. The room was empty. The mattress was gone. The door was open. I asked Father where she went. He said she had been dealt with, and that if I ever tried to interfere again, he'd make sure I was the one who stayed down there." Her voice broke on the last word. "You believed him," Bennett said. "I believed he could do it," she said. "There's a difference." Mara spoke quietly. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone?" "I did," Eleanor said, and there was sudden sharpness in her tone. "I told the contractor. With the note. I told the only person who ever came here when Father wasn't watching. And when nothing happened? I understood the rules," she said bitterly. "Father was respectable. I was just the strange, quiet daughter." Bennett studied her face. "What about Marla?" Eleanor flinched.
Marla Quinn disappeared 2 years later, Bennett said. Her body was found under your foundation. She wore a locket with an H engraved on the back. Eleanor's fingers flew to her throat as though expecting to find it there. "That was mine," she whispered. "The locket. Mother gave it to me when I turned 15. Father took it away after one of our arguments, said I didn't deserve to keep it. And then it shows up on a dead girl," Mara said softly. Eleanor's eyes filled. "I didn't know," she said. "I didn't know he'd given it to her. I just knew Marla stopped coming." "What did your father tell you?" Bennett asked. "That she had run off with a boy, that girls like her got bored easily. He said it like a joke, like it was nothing. And by then," Bennett said, "you knew exactly what 'dealt with' meant." She bowed her head. "Yes." Mara leaned forward. "So tell us this, Eleanor. If you knew what he was capable of, why did his secrets stay buried?" Her reply came out as a whisper dragged over broken glass. "Because I helped bury them," she said. No one spoke. She stared at her hands, as if seeing them for the first time. "After his stroke, he couldn't go downstairs as easily. He made me go instead, to check the wall, to make sure there were no leaks, no cracks. I saw the sealed door. I saw the new concrete. I knew what was behind it, or who had been." "You sealed it again," Bennett said quietly. "He insisted," she said. "He said we had to close that chapter. That if anyone ever found that room, they'd ruin the family. And I wanted it to be over, so I helped. I smoothed the concrete. I threw away the lock. I modified the digitized logs when I realized how much they revealed." She looked up, tears standing in her eyes, but not falling.
I told myself I was burying his sins, not mine. But they didn't stay buried, did they? No, Bennett said. Bones have a way of coming back up. Mara's voice was steady. Eleanor Harwood, you're going to be charged. Maybe not with murder, but with obstruction, evidence tampering, accessory after the fact. There will be consequences. Eleanor nodded, almost relieved. I know, she said. I've been living with the sentence for years. Bennett closed his notebook. One more question, he said. Why keep the house? Eleanor blinked. What? You could have sold it, he said. Walked away. Why stay in the place where all of this happened? She looked at him like the answer was obvious. Because someone had to stand on top of it. As long as I was here, I could make sure the walls stayed closed. And now that they're open, Bennett asked. She exhaled slowly. Maybe, she said, it's finally the house's turn to tell the truth. End of Chapter 9.
Chapter 10. The Last Door.
The Harwood property looked different now. Police tape curled along the fence line like a warning. Vehicles crowded the street. Neighbors watched from porches, drawn by the morbid gravity of truth finally surfacing after decades of silence. Bennett stepped out of the car and scanned the scene. Mara was already waiting at the gate, wearing the expression she reserved for cases that would never fully leave her. They're ready, she said quietly. Inside, Bennett asked. In the old servants' corridor, Mara replied. You're not going to like it. He followed her toward the house, past the place where Marla Quinn had been buried, and the cellar door that had become the center of everything. Officers stood aside as they moved through the hall and slipped into the narrow passage behind the kitchen, an area the forensic team had insisted on re-examining after Eleanor's interview. It was sealed off years ago, Mara said, plaster over plaster. We only caught it because the thermal scan picked up a temperature irregularity. The corridor was dim, the air heavy with dust. The walls bore old nail holes, long abandoned hooks, faded outlines where shelves had been removed. A structural specialist stood beside a newly exposed opening, clipboard tucked under his arm. Mr. Crowe, detective, this is unusual. He stepped back, revealing a small, recessed chamber hidden behind the wall. No door, no hinges, just a hollowed-out space that once had been part of the house's original blueprint and later deliberately erased. Inside the shallow space lay a simple wooden box, small, unpainted, untouched by sunlight for decades. Bennett crouched in front of it, gloved hands steady as he lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in yellowed linen, were objects. A tiny pendant shaped like a bird, a woman's hair ribbon, a child's bracelet, 3 dried flowers pressed between scrap pages. Mara leaned in. What is this? Some kind of memorial? No, Bennett said softly. A ledger. He lifted the first piece, the bird pendant, and turned it over. On the back, almost invisible, L.M. Lydia Mercer. Next, the ribbon, initials embroidered by hand, A.H. Mara frowned. A.H., who's that? Alice Harwood, Bennett said. Eleanor's mother. Mara's expression darkened. But she died from a fall. According to the father, Bennett said.
The third item was the bracelet, a child's name, spelled out in faded plastic beads. Sarah. Mara stiffened. We don't have a victim named Sarah. Not yet, Bennett said.
He reached for the dried flowers, 3 brittle stems bound together by twine. Tucked between them was a torn fragment of an old household log. He opened it carefully.
Only one line was legible. Father says it is easier if the house learns to forget. Mara closed her eyes. He kept trophies. Not trophies, Bennett said. History. His version of it. Mara turned, voice tight. We need to bring Eleanor back down here. No, Bennett said. Not yet. There's something else. He stood, scanning the narrow recess. The wooden box had left an imprint in the dust, but beside it, faintly visible, was another rectangular outline. Empty. Something else used to be stored here, Bennett said. Something removed. Mara's eyes widened. Who removed it? Eleanor? Unlikely. She wanted secrets buried, not exposed. Then who? A sound behind them, footsteps, quiet and hurried. Bennett turned. Eleanor stood in the corridor, flanked by an officer who looked apologetic. He insisted, he said. She said she needed to finish something. Eleanor stepped past him, eyes fixed on the open cavity in the wall. You found it, she whispered. You knew it existed, Bennett said. She nodded slowly. Father called it his order box. He said some people were too noisy to be remembered, that if you kept only the quiet parts, the house would behave. Mara's face tightened. Eleanor, you knew what was inside? No, she said. He never let me see. He said it wasn't meant for me. Her gaze drifted to Bennett. I thought it was financial documents, or things from Mother, but I didn't know it was... Her voice broke. I didn't know. Bennett believed her. The shock on her face was too raw, too unguarded. Eleanor, he said gently, there was another box here, one he removed, recently or years ago, we don't know. Do you? She shook her head, but then her expression shifted, just slightly, as if a thought flickered at the edge of memory. What? Pressed. Eleanor swallowed. After his stroke, he made me burn things, papers, letters. He said they were dangerous misunderstandings, but there was a small box, too. She closed her eyes. I threw it into the furnace because he told me to. Do you remember what was inside? Bennett asked. No, she whispered. He didn't let me open it. Silence filled the corridor. If that box held more victims, Merritt began. It did, Bennett said. And whatever names were inside, we'll never recover them. Eleanor looked sick. She whispered, I destroyed their stories. I helped him erase them. You were a teenager, under threat. This house wasn't a home. It was a system designed to keep you obedient. That doesn't make it right, Eleanor said. It just makes it true. She sank to her knees in front of the opening, staring at the relics of lives her father had taken. Her voice, when it came, was barely audible. How many? She asked. We don't know, Bennett said, but we'll find what we can. She stared at the empty outline in the dust. I wish I had opened that box, she said. I wish I had seen their names. And then, Bennett asked, what would you have done? Eleanor didn't answer, because they all knew the truth. She wouldn't have done anything. Not then, not under him, not with the house watching. Bennett closed the wooden box and stood. We'll take this in and we'll follow what's left. Mara nodded. And Eleanor? We charge her, but we don't mistake guilt for malice. Some prisons aren't built with bars. Eleanor didn't move. She stayed kneeling in front of the hidden chamber, staring into the hollow space where secrets had slept for decades. As Bennett left the corridor, he paused once, looking back. The Harwood house seemed to exhale, as if relieved or emptied. A structure built by hands long gone. A system built by a man who made silence into doctrine, and a daughter who had lived long enough under its roof to lose the boundary between obedience and complicity. Some houses kept their age like a whisper. This one had kept its sins like scripture.
End of Chapter 10. And end of story. Please like and subscribe to support our channel and to listen to more Bennett Crowe Mysteries.